with me, but it was just lovely today. I was glad to be here. I will try to keep them out of the noise in the back room and do our best. Let's pray together. Holy God and Heavenly Father, we do come before you on this early summer Sunday afternoon, and we are glad to say it's well with my soul. When things are going well in our life outside or difficulties have come, we know that ultimately you are with us. And so we just want to remind ourselves that we can trust you and rely on you, but all you do is for our benefit. You're so kind to us. We don't deserve it. Thank you for this chance to get together, to hear your word, to focus on what Jesus is and has done for us. It's in his name we pray this. Amen. Okay, we're working on a new series called Family, the First Social Network. Let's make everything else go away. They're focusing on the family for this month. This is Family Month. Very great. Lots of family kind of things happening. Today is Parents' Day, right? So congratulations to all of you who are parents. Good job. We're going to talk about dealing with spouse. Today you must decide who you will serve. You must choose for yourselves. As for me and my family, we will serve the Lord. This is a little reminder. This is a kind of a key verse that goes with families. This idea that it's up to each generation. Each generation has to decide again to follow God. We don't get to magically pass on that to our children. We have to pass it on. It has to be something we do consciously and actively. And so this was addressed to the people that, to us as parents, or the older generation people, we need to remember that we have to pass on the truth about God. The way we live, the things we say, have to get through to our kids so that they will follow God. Joshua, next page. We began with parents and kids last week. Today, the children's service, we learned about how to deal with your siblings. We will be talking about how to deal with your spouses. Probably we could spend the whole day talking about siblings too, because we still have to deal with siblings and adults, but I don't get to preach at people very often, and since I'm not married, my chance to preach at people and tell them what I couldn't resist it. And so I'm telling you guys what you should do, those of you who are married, deal with dysfunctional families and the new family that God talks about next to this. Remember, a little bit of review. Parents, love your children so that the Lord can bless you and all will go well in your homes. Hesitations 3:5. Not a verse in the Bible, right? The Bible doesn't say love your children. It assumes that you love your children. Next page. How do we do that? Well, I told you 5 things I learned from my father, who was good at loving his children. There was a bunch of us, as you know probably, and these are I think the main principles that he had. He was glad he had us. He said, my quiver is full, and he was always happy to say I have a quiver full. Interestingly, right now there's a movement in America called the Quiver Full movement that says you must have lots of children. And it's wrong. The Bible doesn't say you must have lots of children. But if you do have lots of children, be glad you got them. If you got one, be happy you got one. If you got 2, be happy with that. Be happy, be glad that God gave you children in your quiver. Right? This was the principle that says your children are more important than your image. Right? My mother didn't want to look like a bad mother because her son had long hair, and she realized, no, my dad reminded her, no, that's not what matters. What matters is children and their relationship with God. I told you that in my life, my family, my father was a pastor, and at this point in my life, 6 of me and my brothers and brothers-in-law are pastors. So something turned out okay, right? But we weren't very religious. My dad didn't pray for a long time at a meal, and we didn't always do family devotions every summer. We weren't very religious, because God was just a normal part of my dad's and thus our lives. God was there all the time. It wasn't kind of something that you did on Sunday, it was all the time. And if you can do that, like Deuteronomy says, when you stand up, when you sit down, when you walk with your children along the way, you remind them of God's precepts. That's what Deuteronomy tells us. that's the absolute cutoff. By the time we finish high school, we're 19 and that's right. But probably, I deal with your kids, maybe not yours specifically, but I deal with kids here in Korea who are 14 and 15, and they are ready to handle their lives. Right? In all of history, people have become adults when they're 13 or 14. They've taken on responsibilities. We've got to let them go. And remember, don't exasperate them. Don't exasperate your kids. Don't cause them to be angry at you. There's so many things that we can do, and we just cause so many problems. Don't let that happen. Okay, that was review. Next. Talking about wives and husbands today. Here are 2 screenshots. Okay? Wives and husbands. This is the title that's put in here, and this is Ephesians chapter 5. Okay? Wives and husbands starts here. I think this is wrong. Let's put an X on it. Yeah. You see, 21 was there and 22 was here. I think it should be more like this. Next one. This is a different translation. It puts 21 with all this stuff and says this is how Christians are supposed to live. This is how Christian households, this one, verse 21, is not something connected, it's connected to households, families of God. This is the key for all the rest of what we have to understand. These 2 sections of the Bible are really specific about wives and husbands. This verse is the key to understanding the whole thing. So, we're going to talk about this, but this verse applies to everyone in a Christian family. In a family, we need to submit to one another. We need to follow the other person's lead. We need to not think that we're the person that matters the most. As soon as we get that idea that we think everything revolves around me, there will be trouble in your family. As soon as you're living in a system that says, I'm in charge, whether you're the husband or the wife or the kid or the slave, anyone, if you're the one who's saying, I'm the person in charge, there will be trouble in your family. That's why this thing says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. It's reminding us that the person who has to be in charge of your family has to be Jesus. If you want it to work, Jesus needs to be the one in charge. And that's the key thing to keep in mind. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Then Paul goes on to tell a bunch of different stuff to all the different parts of the household. But start with this. This is the key. All of us need to not think that we're in charge. We need to realize that Jesus is in charge. Obey Him, and then all the rest of it's going to fall properly. So, I think the next page, I'm just going to make sure we're plugged in here. This is a little video I want to show you to remind us that we are different from one another. But let me make sure we got some volume here.
It's just, there's all this pressure, you know? And sometimes it feels like it's right up on me, and I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless, and I don't know if it's going to stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me most, is that I don't know if it's ever going to stop.
You do have a nail in the head.
It's not up the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I mean, I'll bet if we got that out of there.
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing.
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
See, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail.
See, you're not going to say that.
Okay, fine. I'm listening. Fine.
It's just, sometimes it's like, there's this achy, I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. I mean, all of them.
That sounds great.
Ow!
Come on, if you would just
Don't.
Try to see things my way. Do I have to keep on talking till I can go on?
Okay. It starts out so serious looking, right? I think she's really got some significant problem. And then suddenly there's a nail growing out of her head. People tend to be different. I think we know that generally there's differences between men and women, right? And I would say that this one is one of the classic differences, right? Women want to communicate about things, men want to do something to solve it, to fix it, right? But she reminds us, I gotta get louder and louder, she reminds us it's not about the nail, it's, I just want to be heard, right? And women, I understand that you want to be heard, but men just want to solve things, generally, right? There's generally a difference between people. And I think the reality is that Paul understood that there's generally a difference between people. And so that's why he started out with this first line that says, be submissive to one another. Don't try to get your own way all the time in your family, in your household. Don't think that that's what matters. But then he goes on to give details for each of these groups of people that are not necessarily specifically true to you, but are generally going to be true for each of the groups. So children, the thing that he told them was, you've got to obey. And that's because generally children don't like to obey. Generally, I mean, there's some children, some of you might, anyone have one of those children who loves to obey? I didn't think so. But most children need to be reminded by God to obey, right? Parents, there's some parents who are naturally good parents, good at taking care of kids, and good at not exasperating them. But lots of parents, and especially Paul directly addresses fathers here. He says, fathers, don't exasperate your kids. Don't cause your children to be frustrated. And Paul says that to fathers specifically because fathers are the ones who are most likely to clash with their children and frustrate them. So Paul's giving advice. The main thing is this, be submissive to one another. But then he gives some direct advice to the groups that are most likely to have these specific problems. Next page. Right? Everyone submit. Then Paul says, wives, really, you've got to submit. You've got to remember this. Right? Men have this tendency to let women run the world. I know you don't think that's true, but there's an old expression that says, the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. And in lots of ways, certainly in households, women get to run things. And so Paul reminds them, really, you've got to be submissive, right? But then husbands, they have a much bigger problem. And Paul spends about one verse saying, yeah, really, you've got to make sure that you're submissive. Just what I told you, remember that. Then Paul says to husbands, I'm looking at you now, your thing that you've got to make sure you do is to love your wife and give yourself for your wife. Paul says, love like Jesus loved. Jesus gave his life for the church. He says, that's what you've got to do. You'll probably allocate your rule. You'll probably abdicate and let someone else make the decisions as long as you don't have to deal with it. So instead, make sure that you're loving your wife. Make sure that you're focusing on loving your wife. Wives, remember, don't take control. It's tempting, and men are happy to let you do it in lots of ways, but don't do that. Husbands, make sure you keep loving. You'll probably be a little bit submissive in things, but don't let that be who you are. Define yourself as someone who loves your wife. This is how it says it. Follow the lead of one another because of your respect for Christ. A husband also must love his wife. He must love her just as he loves himself. And Paul says, as Jesus loved the church. And a wife must respect her husband. I'm pretty sure these are the areas where most likely we're going to fail. This one we all need to be told about. But husbands, don't forget, your job is to love. To love as much as you love yourself, as much as Christ loved the church. And women, wives, don't forget, respecting your husband is a key thing. If you want your marriage to go well, make sure these things are happening. Next page. Here's why. Because there are lots of problems in marriages. Tons of them. And you know this. I know this because you, or people just like you, come and complain to me about your marriages all the time. Right? And so I kind of, over my life, kept track of the things that people have complained to me about, and I've done a little research about what other things people complain about. And there's tons of problems, right? Money. You fight about money. You fight about, next, kids. How to raise kids. You were raised this way, he was raised that way. It's got to be my way, it's got to be your way, and we fight about it. Well, what did we say last week? No method is going to work, so why fight over something that's not going to necessarily work? You fight over in-laws. I don't want to have to go to your parents' house. You know we have to go to my parents' house. This is Korea. This is how it works. You fight over, well, can we at least go to my house? And you fight over it. Fight over the big decisions. My dad, my dad a lot. My dad used to say he's allowed to handle all the big decisions in life, and Mom gets to decide all the little decisions. So my dad gets to decide whether we go to war or whether we declare ourselves an independent country. And my mom gets to have decisions like where we will live and what kind of house we will buy and how to raise the kids. No, we fight over the big decisions, right? Should we buy a house? Shouldn't we buy a house? Should we take a new job or not take a new job? We fight over the big decisions. We fight over the little decisions. Should the toilet paper hang out this way or should it hang out this way? And we fight over things like that. And those little fights build and build and build. And really you're fighting over something else probably, but you find something to fight with each other about. You fight over, what's next? Intimacy. Right? How much time? You know, you fight over intimacy issues. You fight over next. Something's next. Fight about raising children. The methods of raising children, right? Fight over emotional affairs. You know what emotional affairs are, right? This is where you as a husband or wife are getting your emotional needs met by something other than your husband or wife. There. Fight over emotional affairs. Emotional affairs are, do you understand this idea? This is where you as a husband or wife are getting most of your emotional needs met by something that is not your husband or wife. Physical affairs cause fights, right? This is where you're spending way too much time or having an affair, having sex with someone who's not your husband or wife. Old fights get brought up. And to go along with Paul, maybe this is something that women are better at. Men, we're kind of stupid and we forget our old arguments, but we're pretty good at holding them. But there are lots of men who are good at bringing old fights back too, right? We fight about too much time together. If you have too much time together, you'll fight, right? I wasn't married to a guy, but I traveled with a guy once across North America. We drove from my hometown to Washington and back in about 3.5 weeks. And we spent 24 hours a day together for 25 days. Towards the end, I wanted to kill him. All I wanted to do was to see his body rolling out of my car door and rolling down the highway. And sometimes you need to take a break from one another. If I have too much, if I have not enough time together, right? If you don't have enough time together, you can't build a relationship. If you have too much, so look for a happy medium, right? mess. Not enough kind things done to one another. All these things cause fights. Fights build up and eventually push marriages apart. God said, let no one put asunder, let no one take apart what God's put together. Don't you be the reason that the marriage falls apart. It's not your job, right? If the other person can't do it, that's okay. That's not your fault. But if you are the reason the marriage falls apart, you've disobeyed God and you've hurt a lot of people. How do we deal with this? Fights and words that get said, the things that get said and hurt one another. We're careful. This is what Proverbs says. In Colossians, he's restating this. It says, when you talk, you should always be kind and wise. Then you'll be able to answer everyone in the way you should. The old translation says, when you talk, and when you argue, season your words with salt. Right? Don't be about building up conflict. Be about breaking it down. When you're talking, kind, gentle, soft, tasty ways to say things to one another. And I think if we would start here, if we would start with the things we say, that whole set of arguments, that whole set of things we fight about, a lot of them would just disappear. James says, if you have control of the things you say, you're perfect in every way. And so I'm pretty sure that if we can control the way we deal with our husbands or wives, those things we fight about, that whole big long list, a lot of it's just going to disappear because you're going to be relating to one another in a proper way. You're going to be talking kindly and wisely. You're going to season your words with salt. Your words are not going to be the source of division between you and your husband. I think that's where you start. Watch the things you say. Be careful what you say. And as you allow the relationship to build through kind, good, wise words said to each other, I think we're going to find a lot of the problems, a lot of the difficulties of your marriage disappear in this flood of kind words. That's someone not married talking to you. But I'm not just telling you what I think, I'm telling you what the Bible says. It says, be respectful to one another, submit yourselves to one another. Husbands, don't forget to love. Wives, don't forget to be submissive. And all of us, be careful how we talk to one another, because those words build up into things that will destroy relationships. Let's finish with prayer. There's a couple announcements. Holy God, thank you that you gave us husbands and wives. People here, most of us are married. I pray that you would bless those marriages. Father, I pray that you would give people the strength and the wisdom and the kindness that it needs to build those marriages into solid relationships that will last through a lifetime. And Father, thank you that our relationships we build here are things that we will continue in some way or another through eternity. Father, thank you for each marriage that's represented. Father, some people are in other places in the church right now, but other people are not members of the church. They don't know Jesus. And I pray for those marriages especially, that the wife or husband would be able to, by their attitude, draw the other husband or wife to them. That their kindness and their love shown to their husband, to their spouse, would be enough to bring that other person to a knowledge of Jesus. Father, I pray that you would keep us all from making mistakes in our relationships, that we would not say things to hurt or injure one another, that we would season our words with salt, and that because of that, we would be people who demonstrate the love of God in all we do. Lord Jesus, we pray this as you taught us to pray, saying, Our Father in heaven,